Before we begin this episode, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we are recording on, the Whadjuk Noongar people. We wish to acknowledge and show our respect for their elders, past, present and emerging, and for their continuing culture and the contributions to this city and region on which we are recording this podcast. In this episode, you may hear some outdated terms that were referenced in journal articles. Some listeners may find these terms offensive. Welcome to Let's Be Perfectly Queer,
a queer podcast creating space to talk about all things queer.
That's us, and this is our first official episode.
It sure is. I'm Katie.
And my name is Archie.
And what's been happening recently? What's the news?
What's the news? Well, currently in Perth, it is Pride Month. So Pride Month is a whole month dedicated to all things Pride. There's lots of different events happening that ends up with a Pride Parade and lots of different things going on. And there's Fair Day. And
there's always a lot of fun to celebrate with yourself, your family, anybody who wants to come around. It's a good time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of community events. So it doesn't have to be just people who are 18 plus. There's lots of family-friendly opportunities for all of those who are celebrating Pride this month.
A lot of fun to be had. Well, this episode we are talking about you.
We are talking about me.
Want to unpack that a little bit?
We can. So this episode, we're just going to quickly talk about me and my journey. It gives you guys an idea of who we are a bit more as your hosts.
Absolutely. And what did you want to call this? Assembling Archie, was it?
Yeah, Assembling Archie. I thought it was very me. It's very Marvel-esque. For those of you who don't know, I'm a huge Marvel fan, and it came to my mind while I was on the toilet, like all my good ideas.
I was going to say, I don't think in the photo that we posted they could see all of your Marvel tattoos. So
no, they couldn't. I'm pretty sure it was a Marvel shirt I was wearing though.
Oh, very
the one
true.
That your mum made. I'm going to talk about my journey. I'm not going to go all the way back to being a baby, but I'm going to keep it short and just get to the point with my journey.
I think it's talking about from when you identified yourself as trans.
Ugh. But that's a very confusing story though. It's like, let me take you back to when I was 6 years old. You know what I mean? There's like a whole process. It's not just like, this is when I was trans. Do you know what I mean? There's like a whole backstory to it as well.
Yeah, but isn't that an important backstory that is Assembling Archie? Isn't that when you started to become this person that you call yourself today?
I guess yes and no, because I hid it for so long.
But even that is part of your story.
It is. So I can go back there, but it just might be a very long episode. All right. So basically, I always felt different. Being a twin, it was even harder for me because you're constantly compared. As soon as you're out of that womb, you're compared. Whether they are conscious of it or not, we were constantly compared. The way we walked, who talked first, who crawled, all that kind of stuff. Everything was a competition. And I already found that part really hard. And then she fit the bubble of feminine and girly and wanting dolls and all that kind of stuff. And I was the complete opposite. So I constantly always felt like I was wrong or there was something wrong with me. And so for me, it felt like she was the perfect child and I was the one that was wrong and there was something different with me. And I always felt that I had this sense of difference. And I did research this up in university for a radio story. And I always had this sense of difference. Like I was different to my sister. I was different to my family. I was different to everyone at school. And it was almost like this, I was on the outside looking in with everyone, if that made sense. I just didn't feel like I belonged in any sense of the word. And in high school, I was drawn to drama because I felt that was my way that I could learn coping mechanisms, to put on a face, to act and pretend to the world something that I didn't believe myself to really be, if that makes sense.
Do you feel like that was the first time that you could actually be yourself because you could act the way that felt true?
100%. And when I was in year 7, right, up into that, so year 7 was when you first started drama, and every time in drama, I always played male characters. No matter what, I always chose the male character. And then there was, you know how you used to do those end of year concert little things? My teacher chose me to be a female character, and I had a panic attack. Obviously this teacher didn't know me at all, didn't know like me from Bar of Soap, and yeah, they made me play a feminine character, and I had a panic attack. I was not about any of that.
At that point in time, was it quite evident that you had very male mannerisms?
Oh yeah, I was very masculine. The teachers would laugh at me because I had male handwriting, all this kind of stuff they would say from a very young age, and that kind of stuff. Yeah,
that's really weird that teacher has been like, oh yeah, that person should play a feminine character even though they seem completely opposite. There's something there that's a bit weird. Nobody identifies a student who evidently is not the kind of character that you're looking for and says, oh, no, they would make a perfect feminine character if they do not fit that brief. Like, I was like, that just sits wrong with me in itself.
So I'd always felt different, and with drama, I was able to play male characters. So all the way from year 7 to up until year 10, because this was a Catholic school, I was allowed to play male characters, which is kind of weird for a Catholic school. And it was a co-ed Catholic school, so it wasn't like it was, what do you call it when it's single ed? What is it called?
All girls school or all boys school?
Yeah, it wasn't a single sex school.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but it was a co-ed school. So, but they always let me play a male character. There was even a point where in I think it was year 8, I got one of the major roles as a boy against boys. Like a boys all auditioned, and they were year 9 and 10, and I was in year 8, and I got the role. So in saying that, it's quite a progressive school for allowing me to do that and allowing me to explore who I was and gender as a construct.
I mean, that's very true. Or you could have just been really good at drama and they could have been really bad as well.
I was also very good at drama. I did get the drama award, so I was very good at it. But I think if you put it that way, I've been acting since before I knew what I was doing, putting on a face that wasn't me. Masking
to be what people needed you to be.
Yeah, masking to be this feminine thing that people believe me to be. But so going to Catholic school, having brought up a Catholic family, it was really hard for me to come out on my LGBT journey, especially, when you see, life is meant to be woman, man, masculine, feminine, that kind of stuff, and that whole image that you're brought up with.
I guess it also plays into it that you lived in a country town, so that is a huge. If you don't have those kind of role models, and this has been identified throughout minorities, if you don't have those kind of role models, you don't really know where you're meant to fit.
Correct. And there was, I think there was 1 or 2 gay lesbian couples. It was kind of like taboo, like you just don't talk about them. And that's what I was brought up with. And even when I did think that I was a lesbian and I came out to my mum, she told me that, it's a phase, like, we're going to laugh about this one day.
Of course.
And that kind of stuff. And now, like, I'll give her credit. She's now one of my biggest supporters. But at the time, it was very like, oh, we'll laugh about this one day. It's fine that you have a girlfriend. Don't hold hands in town. Don't do this because it's a small town and people talk and that kind of stuff. And the problem with a small town is everyone is so worried about each other's business and are worried about the image that you're putting out and how it impacts not only you, but the family. And so I could never be truly me in a small town like that.
Yeah, of course. When did that change? Like, when did you feel like you could start identifying as something that was closer to yourself?
When I got out of that town. As soon as I moved to Perth, I went to university. I found a group of people that were a lot more open, and I was very lucky going to Murdoch University because they had quite a artsy kind of eclectic open group of people there, and I was able to explore myself, my gender, my sexuality, and who I was in more just more, I guess.
Sounds like a lot of fun when you put it like that.
You know what I mean? You have.
No, I get you. I get you.
You have no, there's no one at the back of your mind constantly telling you, do this, don't walk like that, don't talk like that kind of thing,
Yeah, it's not that kind of construct that you have the constant reminder that you have to be some way.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so I thought, maybe I'm a lesbian. I was like, because I knew that I've always had crushes on girls and that kind of stuff, and that's why I felt I was wrong. And growing up in a Catholic school, I would get upset and cry myself to sleep at night thinking I was going to hell and that I'm the worst thing ever and I'm horrible and all this kind of stuff and what's wrong with me. And I used to pray to God to that all this up until that point, 12 or whatever I was, that everything was a bad dream and this was all a coma and I wake up and I was in the body of a boy.
That's horrible.
And that was my my life, and I'd constantly fake being sick because I was really good at acting, fake being sick at home just to not go to school and have to put on this societal construct that has been designed for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's a lot of effort. Like, that takes up so much mental effort, so much time, so much, and you can't really develop very true relationships or very close relationships if you're 100% feeling that you're having to be something else for everybody else.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I felt. Like, I was never me. And then when I went to university, I thought I found the group that I belonged, and then I started going out and meeting other LGBT people, but I still felt like I was on the outside, and I still felt, again, like I was putting on a mask, but a different version of a mask that was closer to me and closer to my identity, but it still didn't feel like it truly fit.
Do you know what? I feel like maybe that's where having the matchup of what your sexuality is, which you, at that point in time, you were attracted, you are, I shouldn't say were, you are attracted to women.
Yeah.
And that finally aligned, but having your identity and who you defined yourself as did not.
Yeah, and in the scene and in that kind of place, everybody was still so focused on your identity and the way you look and the way you dress, and it just felt like constantly you're on display again. And yeah, so then, you know, I tried being lesbian for a few years, but still, again, it felt foreign and that it didn't fit.
And I feel like if we're thinking it was around 2010, around that time, I don't think I really had any understanding of transgender people at that time. I don't think it was a hot topic in the media. I don't think there was a whole lot of information about it that was readily available, unless you really probably researched.
I don't think so. It probably was about early 2010 that I found out that transgender even existed. Because you saw it in the films and they made fun of it, and it was always a joke at the expense of the trans people. Yeah. You know, looking back at it, was it Ace Ventura, Pet Detective? That was one of the first, I think it was that movie, one of the first times I saw a male to female transgender person in the media, and it was made into to be a joke.
Yeah.
And I never saw transgender men in the media or mainstream media or films or anything like that. And so even though I was like, oh yeah, there are women who have sex change, and that was the common language back then, you know, sex change. I never really thought about the fact that it could also be female to male, because you just never saw it. And, you know, looking at it now, I'm like, well, I'm an idiot. If you can have a sex change from male to female, why could I not see it that way? And the first time that I was introduced to female to male was someone actually commented on one of my Instagram photos, #FTM. And I was like, what is that? And then I realized that's the hashtag for female to male.
That's quite abrupt to comment on somebody's
right?
Instagram. Like, that can be perceived as quite rude, especially if they don't know you, which it didn't sound like they did.
I didn't know. It was some random person on social media. But then that led me down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, of course.
Because at this point, I was kind of already identifying as non-binary or gender fluid and that kind of stuff, because I didn't feel like I fit the female gender.
Mm.
And so I was like, all right, I'm going to go down this path and have a look. And I found lots of different transgender men on Instagram and social media, but they were all in America. There was barely anyone that I could relate to or look up to in Australia.
By the way, I just want to clarify that by being really rude, I don't mean that being as in like identifying as trans. It's an individual who doesn't know you making any comment about your gender or your sexuality. I think that in itself is rude.
Yeah. And in social media, it's kind of something it's something you get used to. People constantly comment on your appearance or who you are, and they just assume they know who you are based on some pictures or a video here and there.
But thank goodness for this random person, because they actually helped the
right?
one troll that probably has done some help for you.
You know, and that is that kind of thing. So that was what made me have a look down that kind of stuff. Afterwards, I did more research and I looked into it and I saw the whole process, and I went to my doctor. I went to several different doctors, because the first thing I knew was I hated my chest, and it was something that caused me a lot of issues and dysphoria. And before I even realized that I was trans, when I was still identifying as gender fluid, I went to several doctors and I said, well, I've done the research and this is what it's commonly known as, and that kind of stuff. And constantly they were just like breast reduction on all of the forms. And I said, well, actually it's called top surgery, or it's called, you know,
a mastectomy, because a breast reduction is not the same as a mastectomy. You still have breast tissue with a reduction.
Yeah. And so, it was even seeing that and going through that experience made me not want to keep going through the journey, because of the horrible experience I first had with doctors and surgeons many moons before I even started my transition. I went to a surgeon in Perth, and it was for a consultation, and we looked at what kind of surgery and that kind of stuff, and he was very, very touchy in the chest, like overly touchy, and made me feel very uncomfortable, and was poking at this point, I was like a size 10 and you could see my ribs, and he was saying, oh, you might be a bit overweight.
What?
He was disgusting. And so, you know, that was my experience.
That's horrible. That's absolutely horrible, because you're already in such a vulnerable experience. You're such in a vulnerable state, not really knowing where to go, seeking help from a professional to try and get some form of guidance to how you could start identifying as something that rings more true to yourself. And then they're taking advantage of that. That's disgusting.
Yeah. So my initial experience with healthcare professionals was horrendous. I hated every part of it. There was no information out there. I couldn't find any groups on Facebook or anything like that that I could be a part of to ask these questions. So I felt very alone. You know, eventually I found the right way to go about it. I talked to a really lovely, amazing doctor who's now left back to the UK, which I'm very sad about. He was incredible. He made me feel validated. He made me feel seen, and he helped me get on a mental health plan. Then from there, I went to go see a psychiatrist who was recommended by my best friend, who said, oh, you know, this person would be great to talk to. From there, I then got a referral to go see an endocrinologist. Then to be able to be ticked off for hormones, I went and saw a psychiatrist who gave me the official diagnosis because they were associated to the endocrinologist clinic. There's lots of different processes to go through now, and there's a lot of easier processes, but this is the process I went through. And then finally, you know, I got the prescription and started hormones.
How did that feel? That I'll define it as, how did that feel finally getting to that point of being able to get hormones?
It felt like a relief, but a part of me thought that my first shot was going to be there. So it was that kind of like, oh, amazing, but I just got a script. And so I was like, oh, is that it?
That's so disappointing.
Right? I'm like, oh, is that it? But then I realized, okay, well, and I said, is this it? Like, do I not get the shot here? She's like, oh, no. Then you have to go. And I made an appointment with a doctor. At the time, my amazing doctor actually wasn't in the country because he was visiting his family. And so I had to go to a doctor to give me the shot, which was the most painful shot ever. But now, you know, you do my shots, so it's great.
Yeah. For anybody who doesn't know out there, so the testosterone, if you choose, and I'm pretty sure in Australia you're quite limited with what you can have.
Very limited.
It's an intramuscular injection, and it's quite a viscous ampule of medication that you've got. So it's not just a quick in and out injection. It's quite a long process where you have to inject it into one of your large muscles of your leg. So for somebody not to do it correctly, it does end up with a lot of pain associated with it. So going and finding a good health professional who can assist you with that is pretty great. Yeah, that is it. And there's so many health professionals out there now, but I was in so much pain. I couldn't walk properly for like a few days. It was horrendous. And then when I got home on the couch, like I couldn't like lift my legs, and every time I moved, it just sent pains all down my legs and that kind of stuff. So if you are listening to this and it's something that you're thinking about, make sure that you do seek the correct medical advice and attention and expertise, because it can be very painful. Yeah, go on the forums and get some advice from people. There's a lot of good people out there who will be able to assist you with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and there's a Facebook group. I think it's Trans in WA, and there's a lot of information on there. And a lot of people there that now, which I wish I found this resource before, that can assist in helping, and everybody there's super friendly, and they all share their stories and how they're going and that kind of stuff.
There's a lot of groups on Facebook at the moment that could help you out with these kind of situations and that are very supportive. So what we'll do is we'll link them in the show notes. So if there's anybody out there who just needs some more information for themselves, or because they've got somebody else in their lives that might need this information, or if they're just interested, we'll link it in the show notes for you, so you've got the resources down there.
But yeah, so then I finally started hormones, and the first few months are interesting. Your emotions are all over the place because obviously your hormone levels are up and down, and when I first started, you had to have 1,000 milligrams of Reandron every 4 weeks. So that's a lot of testosterone going through your body to hit a certain level, and then you start to measure your level, make sure it's at the normal male range and that kind of thing. There were so many times my emotions were all over the place. I was like, is this the right thing? Have I made a mistake? All that kind of stuff. And then my voice, I could not sing, and I sounded like I was strangling a chicken, and no matter what I did, it just sounded horrible. And so there was a gut kind of like feeling like, have I messed up? Am I ever going to be able to sing again? Like, that was one of the things that did run through my mind. And my fat distribution was all over the place, that I felt chubby and I felt disgusting. And because I have a lot of body issues anyway, from being a fat child. Or not fat child, like fat in high school.
All us chubby kids out there
you
represent.
And I just felt like horrible, because I have such an unhealthy, I'm not going to lie, I have such an unhealthy relationship with my body and putting on weight and that kind of stuff, that I was probably at my lowest those first few months.
Did any of the healthcare professionals or the psychiatrists explain to you what the process of hormonal transition was going to be like?
No. And I wish they did.
Yeah.
Because I found all this information myself online and saying, it is quite a hard time. Your emotions are all over the place, but I had no idea how bad it was going to be. It wasn't till after I transitioned, like, maybe in my second year, where I saw everybody talking about it, and it became much more of a okay thing to talk about. Like, these first few months were horrendous, where some people don't have this, everybody's journey is different, but I just felt so low those first few months.
Yeah. To be honest, the only thing, prior to meeting you, the only thing that I had to reference was the L word. And that's really sad.
That is a very problematic show.
Absolutely.
In my opinion, in the way that it portrays trans people. Before then, I was probably questioning it. Like, was I in the wrong body, that kind of stuff. And that show left me with a gross, disgusting feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. But that's where the problems lie, is that back in that day, that sounds old.
Makes us feel really old.
It does. But there wasn't really much out there. There wasn't much in mainstream media that was representative of anybody who was transgender, specifically from female to male. So it's hard to know what to expect. And granted, I didn't actually know you at this time. So
I'm really glad that the L Word have rectified this issue and come out with this the new show saying, hey, we screwed up. We're going to fix it. And they've done a much better representation this time around. But now, what am I? 3 years on testosterone, I think? Something like that.
I think you're at least 3.5.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Because it was
Would
June.
have been like June. Yeah, so about 3 years. Everything's kind of to normal. My voice is starting to settle. There's still some days that my voice lowers and goes up a little bit deeper and a little bit higher and that kind of stuff. And
it's so funny. Sometimes you wake up and I'm like, oh, hello, Barry Manilow.
It's funny though. Like, I'll get to work and then someone at work will be like, are you sick? And I'm like, no, I just woke up like this. This is my voice today. And they're like, oh, I like it. It sounds better low. I'm like, what? So my voice isn't good on a regular day? That's fine. But yeah, no. So it's been an interesting journey, and I really wish there was more information when I was out there. But I'm really glad to see that, especially in Perth, the community is very welcoming and very informative, and there's a lot of information now for anybody who is considering that maybe they are trans.
Yeah. And even now, like, being 3 years down the track, the things that have changed is like your hair distribution that you've got, your muscle distribution, like you were talking about your voice. Yeah. Now that your testosterone levels have stabilized, you don't really get your I think it's every 4 months you have your testosterone injection.
I'm very lucky. So with me, I already had too much testosterone in my body. My body already had too much T.
It knew.
It knew. And so growing up in high school, I already had a lower voice. And so I did get teased a bit about it, because kids are cruel. But who's laughing now? Because that extra T definitely means that instead of like the usual roughly 3 months that most trans guys have to get an injection, mine's every 4 months. Yeah,
it works out very well.
Less needles. It's great. But yeah, like I think in another episode we might go into all the changes and those kind of things. But yeah, that's me. I'm trans. I'm a teacher, which was an interesting experience in itself, and I might even go into that in more detail in another episode about transitioning as a teacher.
Yeah, I think that would be very interesting to talk about. I've got a couple of bits of information that I found really interesting because, of course, having an episode on trans, I kind of wanted to know where the history of trans came in, because like I was speaking about, there wasn't a huge amount that I really knew from where I grew up, and I grew up in Perth, and granted I did go to an all-girls school because that is always fun, but I just wanted to know how publicized it was. And actually in learning what I did and looking at a couple of different journal articles, I wasn't surprised, because really all in all, The different articles that I looked at, which was like one from National Geographic that was back in 2022, so
which is very recent.
Which is this year. I
That's
said back in June 2022, and then there was one from 2018, and there was one from 2010. So it tends to talk about the coining of the phrase of transgender, which was back in the 1960s, around that time, and then prior to that, the word transsexual was used, and that was in about 1949. So it's really looking at it, it's quite recent, all in all, and the word trans, which somewhere has been put in as a very British term, which I thought very odd in itself.
I'm intrigued. Why is it a British term?
I'm not really sure. I think it was because it was put into the Oxford Dictionary, and so they were just like, it's just ours.
Well, if it's in the Oxford Dictionary.
Yeah, this is British. But that was back in 1996.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So really not that long ago. I say not that long ago, but it doesn't feel that long ago when it comes to like grand scale history, seeing as the first gender conforming surgery was like back in, I think it was like 1960. Let me have a quick look at this because it was really interesting.
I think it was quite early.
Yeah, it was it was in 1952.
Oh wow, that's even earlier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. So there was, and that was back in Denmark. So that's
Denmark have always been super progressive.
Actually, I'll amend this.
Was
so
it not?
No. It wasn't Denmark, but the first one, when you actually look at trans history, because there isn't like a specific lineage of where things started and where things go to, there was one thing that is finite, is that there was an institute in Germany called the Institute for Sexual Research that was founded in 1919, and that was by this doctor who was very interested in sexual genderism and all that kind of stuff, which is very progressive.
Very progressive.
Magnus Hirschfeld.
Is that how you say it? Is that how it's pronounced?
Dude, am I German? Only 7%. But one of the first surgeries was, I believe, was maybe in 1930s, and I'll link all the documents or some of the articles down below. But it was it was a trans woman. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the surgery wasn't successful.
Was this what the Danish girl was based on?
You know what? That is a great question, and I don't know.
Well, we'll have I don't know. Maybe someone can tell us if you're listening to this episode. Was that based on the Danish girl? Because the book
is the Danish girl's character called Lily?
I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And then man. I'm pretty sure because in the movie, it was deemed successful because it was completed, but then she died from it.
Yeah, so potentially, who knows? Somebody can tell us.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting. But either way, one of the first gender-conforming surgeries was for a patient called Lily Elber, who was a German transgender woman who ended up actually, unfortunately, dying due to complications of her uterine transplant. But the first...
It sounds very much like the movie.
Oh, okay.
I'm so intrigued. I'm so intrigued.
All right, sure. But of course, it was noted that the first to undergo gender-conforming surgery was back in 1952, and that was Christine Jorgensen in Denmark, who was an American, and that was all successful. And Christine was very well known as a transgender woman for her trans activism, and one of the first trans activists, I believe, out there. I could be wrong, but she did a lot for trans pride and actually bringing that up, and I believe her history was actually in the military as well. So
oh wow,
yeah, so that's where the first gender conforming surgeries were, but the identification of like when these terms were coined. But it's been well publicized throughout history that there was things other than the male and female gender, and that's back in a lot of South Asian countries. There's a lot of Greek and Roman history that states it as well. I'm sure there's other areas around the world, if I did a little bit more research or if I was a historian, that I could find. Specifically, there's one in Rome that I found very interesting who was a ruler, and granted they only ruled for like 2 years and died at the age of 18 because they were persecuted, but identified male at birth and dressed as a female and identified as in feminine pronouns, and stated that they wanted to cut their genitalia off.
Oh, wow.
And of course was persecuted. But that was back in like 212 Common Era.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, crazy, right?
That is crazy.
Yeah,
that is
so
very crazy.
It's a very natural thing.
And so it's interesting for people who say, transgender people haven't been around for very long.
Since the dawn of time.
Since, what is that, 200 common time?
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So that's the whole thing, is that it's so natural, and it's in humans, and it's in animals, and it's in everything.
Yeah, isn't there like species of fish that change gender?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think there's also insects, and I think there's also other animals, but I'll have to talk to a zoologist about that kind of stuff. But it just shows that even though these issues have only been highlighted even recently, that this is something that humanity has been dealing with it for a very long period of time and is actually incredibly normal.
But yeah, so I think that's the end of this episode.
I think it is. I think there is so much more that we could say, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of more episodes on trans, but it's more your story.
Yeah.
And
it's
just a little start, an introduction. Thanks for listening, everybody, to our first official episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer. So until next time, guys, hopefully we've been perfectly queer.